Another player I think who's in fantastic form that I want to talk about next is Hwang Hee-chan, and we've talked about Wolves quite a bit on this podcast, don't we? And
Mhm.
the indifferent year they've had. They had a struggle to close out last year. The whole furore with Lopetegui coming and going, and how that affected Wolves was a big story really. And we worried about them. They've obviously come back quite strongly this season, and he's been central to that, Hwang, hasn't he? And Gary O'Neill's done a great job at Wolves, and they won, I think, 3-0, wasn't it, this week? And I don't know what it is about this guy. He's the kind of player you want on your team purely because he's a pest to play against. He's become pretty prolific now. I think he's got 10 goals this season so far in 19 appearances, which I think is a really good return. And I think him alongside the likes of Pedro Neto are making Wolves a really nice attacking team to watch as well, aren't they? Which is not what I expected either. What have you made of Hwang? He's got quite a big supporter base, hasn't he, back in South Korea, but he's becoming a bit of a superstar in England now as well.
Yeah, it was definitely. I think obviously look back a couple of years ago when he first came in, and it was an interesting one. Obviously did well at Leipzig, and um, he's definitely carried a lot of promise coming in. I think we didn't quite see it as often in that first season. I think he had like 20 appearances and from the start, and I think about 15 sub appearances, and I think he only scored 5 goals. And then you look at the return that he's provided this year. It does
Mm.
seem like Gary O'Neill's been absolutely instrumental in his form, and the way that they're playing their football really suits him down to a T. I think in the way that Wolves attack and transition from defence into attack really quickly, I think it suits him perfectly. He's actually dribbling more in this season. I think he's also got 3 assists. I think he got 2 assists in this last game as well. And you look at him as a threat. Um, he's perfectly capable of holding the ball up. He's really dynamic in
Mm.
his movements as well. And it'll be interesting to see how many goals he ends up on this season. He's 27 years of age now. He's probably approaching, his peak. Um, but it's great to see him coming in and actually fulfilling that sort of potential that he did have. I think he was a lot of people were aware of him when he was in Germany, and he just
Yeah.
looks a threat every time he plays at the minute. And he's got that little bit of a nasty streak to his game, hasn't he? Which I quite like. I think if you're on an opposition team, you really dislike him, but if he's on your team, you absolutely love him. And
Yeah.
yeah, obviously he's scored more goals, and I think he's the top scorer for Wolves at the minute, isn't as well. And you mentioned there as well, another mention to Pedro Neto. It was great to see him come back in this game. Um, he's been so unlucky with injuries over the last year or so, like 18 months. And all of a sudden, and they're a team in form. I think they've won their last 3 games, and we
Yeah.
were talking about struggling, weren't we? How fickle football is.
It's well, Wolves are one of them teams where they've just obviously beaten Everton's side, who again looked like they were kind of on a resurgence as well. I know they've had an indifferent kind of last couple of games, but a 3-0 win against Everton is really impressive for Wolves, I think. And Juan didn't even get on the score sheet this time, But like you say, he provided the assists and he was an extra dimension to the attack. And I think it's just that nuisance factor that really impresses me because he's almost involved in like everything good they do. And that's kind of a measure of him as an attacking player, isn't he? He makes space and he finds space and his finishing is brilliant. So we're talking about Arsenal needed a striker. I think he's the kind of player that would really benefit Arsenal too, isn't he, Hwang? But he's definitely going to be central to whatever Wolves do this season, isn't he? And they're climbing the table too, looking at a mid-table position. Can you see him kind of kicking on and scoring more? Do you think this is just a temporary bit of form for him, or do you think he's actually genuinely the real deal in the Premier League now? I think he's proven that point.
It's definitely shown that he's a real threat in terms of his physicality. I think that's what he offers differently to some of the compared to some of the other Wolves attackers. They're not exactly their physicality isn't exactly powerful as such, but whereas he does give that, and he's able to kind of bully defenders in that way as well with his frame. Um, so yeah, you mentioned that about Arsenal, but I think they're after more of a kind of an out and out goal scorer. I think although Hwang has obviously been a really rich vein of form, I don't think he's going to be the sort of player who's going to put up numbers of 20 plus consistently. Although he could work towards that this season. I think it's too early to kind of suggest that he's capable of of consistently putting this kind of run together permanently. But see where he is at the end of the season, and they've got a real asset on their hands, really, Wolves, and they just look like a threat from all angles at the minute.
Again, what a turnaround from what we were saying from the end of last season and the troubles we thought they might have. So yeah, big improvement from them.